Thanks for being here with us today, everyone. Appreciate your time. So we're gonna start off with the land acknowledgement, and then we'll pass it over to our moderator today, the brilliant Mariah Weber. We ask you to join us in acknowledging the Chumash peoples, their elders, both past and present, as well as their future generations. We would like to take this opportunity for us all to reflect on how the work we do here today in our search for knowledge, our opportunities to teach, and every day in our chosen fields affects these lands and the people of these lands that we work with and research to protect. We acknowledge that this university system was founded upon exclusions and erasures of many indigenous peoples, including those on whose lands this institution is located, the villages and unceded lands of the Chumash people. This UCSB administration has failed to faithfully and dutifully support the traditional custodians of these lands, Chumash people and indigenous students, through their continued support of Mauna Kea. As we work together to prevent further damage to these lands and waters that support not only our livelihoods, recreation, lifestyles, research, and education, we remember that the Chumash peoples of this area have been separated from these lands, unable to maintain livelihoods as they should, unable to recreate traditionally, unable to maintain their traditional lifeways freely, and unable to have the same access to their lands that we are provided, to do their own traditional research and educate their future generations. The Chumash people are comprised of the descendants of indigenous peoples removed from their island of origin, Limu, Santa Cruz, Anapac, Anacapa, Wima, Santa Rosa, and Tucan, San Miguel, subjugated by 5 missions during Spanish colonization of the Central Coast, from Malibu to Morro Bay and inland to Bakersfield. The villages upon which this university sits were a safe haven for maritime travelers, a place alive with trading, hospitality, and abundance, a place where knowledge of and from the surrounding areas far and wide was shared with all people of this place and its many visitors, a traditional place of sharing knowledge and education, a tradition this university has an obligation to remember. Many of the projects and research conducted by this university are within the traditional territory of the Chumash peoples and or affect other indigenous peoples in their territories. And in spite of all of this, each tribe, council, clan, and band is working diligently to restore and continue their traditional stewardship practices on these lands and heal from this historical trauma. The damage that has been done and continues to be done by not sharing the true history and legacy in this place and others, and by the exploitation of the natural cultural resources of these areas, can never be erased. There is no mitigation or research project that can make their communities whole again, but we can do better. As educators, friends, and allies together, we can acknowledge the mistakes and atrocities of the past and move forward in remembrance and relationship with the local Chumash peoples and other indigenous peoples, to facilitate their process of healing by making sure that our processes here make room for their Chumash and indigenous voices to be heard, their traditional ecological knowledge of these territories to be listened to, and their peoples to be a part of the healing of these lands and waters, as well as themselves. This acknowledgement, though brief and in no way complete, demonstrates a commitment by this institution and their educators to begin the process of creating a relationship with the local Chumash and indigenous communities and work to dismantle the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism. We come together today to acknowledge, stand up for, and give voice to the unceded lands and waters of the Chumash and all their peoples. We thank you all for virtually joining us. The MCC is very excited to have Funmilola with us today. To be sure you get the most out of today's performance, please be sure to put your screen in speaker view, which you can find on the upper right corner of your Zoom screen. So just click speaker view. Moderating our event today is doctoral student Mariah Weber. Mariah Weber is a multimedia artist and doctoral student of feminist studies at UC Santa Barbara. Her research seeks to theorize connections between racism, sexism, colonialism, spirituality, and erotophobia as it relates to Black quotidian sexual expression and modes of cultural production. Mariah is a trap music connoisseur and ancestor vessel. She comes in peace, but she also carries one. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Mariah, and with that, I will hand it over to you.
Oh, Bella, thank you so much for introducing me and thank you for welcoming us into the space and also for just acknowledging the indigenous peoples that have been on this land. And thank you so much for the bio reading the end. I didn't think you were going to do that, but thank you. I'm very excited to be here today for us to come together to engage with Funmilola Fagbamila's work. So I'm just going to get into her bio and then allow her to come onto the stage. And after I read her bio, I also want to give her a very warm welcome and let her know that we appreciate her being here for UCSB and for also choosing to perform in this space. So I'll go ahead and start reading her bio. Funmilola Fagbamila is a Nigerian American playwright, performance artist, and professor. Her current project, entitled The Intersection Woke Black Folk, which we will see tonight, is a stage play on the complexities of Black political identity, which has been met with critical acclaim by thinkers and artists such as Angela Davis, Erica Badu. This production opened to sold-out houses at the Pan-African Film and Arts Festival in 2018 and the Skirball Cultural Center in 2019. The Intersection recently completed an international tour, staging in venues across England, France, the Netherlands, and Brazil. Funmilola currently serves as a professor of Pan-African Studies at California State University, Los Angeles. As one of the original organizers of the Black Lives Matter movement, Funmilola contributed to the organization's inception in 2013. Her work was honored by the US Congress in both 2015 and 2018, and her writing, political analyses, and social commentary have been featured in publications such as The Guardian, Now This News, and NBR. Professor Fagbamila has delivered keynote addresses and performances at universities across the US and Europe. Please join me in welcoming Funmilola Fagbamila.
Greetings. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Thank you, Mariah. I appreciate you. I appreciate you. And I really appreciate your bio too. That was very good. But yes, I'm very happy to be here with you all today. I'm just going to jump right into it if you all don't mind. If we could just, Mariah, unless you had some more you wanted to mention?
Nope.
Absolutely. So thank you all for being here today. I wanted to have a conversation with you all. I'm grateful for you all for joining us. We are in what has been called unprecedented times. Okay, I'm seeing folks in the chat. Okay, I'm seeing you all. We are in what has been called unprecedented times. I think that when we consider what we're living amidst in this year, it's hard for folks to even really process what it is that we are living through this particular historical moment amidst what is understood now to be like the largest protest moment in the history of America. And so what is going on with the movement for Black Lives, with the Black Lives Matter movement, as was mentioned? Thank you, Mariah, for reading my bio. It's always very interesting when I hear, this kind of information about me read out loud, because I've never perceived of myself as what would be considered like an activist. When I was around 18, 19 years old, people started to refer to me as an activist, like, oh, Funmilola, you do these things, and Martin Luther King Jr., Angela Davis, you an activist. I was like, okay. Sure. I just think that is what we call caring about things that we all should care about. So what would it look like if we normalize caring? What would it look like if we cease applauding for exceptional human beings, right, who do things that we all can essentially embody in our everyday realities? What does activism look like? Activism doesn't just look like marching. It doesn't just look like protesting. It doesn't just look like voting. It looks like a number of different things. It looks like, what is your artistry? What are you teaching? What are you learning? What are you sharing after you learn? Are you open to expansion? Are you checking in with your community? Are you showing up on a local level? What are you creating that can be helpful in the world? And so I wanted to use this piece that I started to write several years ago now. I started to conceptualize this piece in 2015. I started to conceptualize this piece, and I realized that the reason that I wanted to write about what I speak about in the intersection woke Black folk, the complexity of Black political identity, is because I was observing what can be understood as a type of difficulty, a lack of communication, and what might be considered a type of aggression amidst Black folks within our own community because of our own individual ideological leanings. This piece deals with gender, sexual expression, sexuality, mental health, religion. And so the small snippet that we're going to look at today just kind of touches the surface of a broader conversation about the complexity of Black political identity. Now, you're going to meet 4 Black people in this piece, and I'm not going to get too much into the explanation because I'm going to go ahead and get into the performance, but you're going to meet 4 Black people, and many of you are going to recognize them, especially folks that identify as Black, that are in the chat right now. You more particularly will be able to identify these people and say, yeah, I know that person. You know, that person's my uncle, or that's my mom, or that's, my neighbor. They act or behave or engage in this particular way. And I wrote this piece because I know these people very personally. I understand that they are having linked interest, but they disagree vehemently with each other. And again, like I mentioned, they have linked interest. And before I dive into the piece, I want to acknowledge why we're in a moment where acknowledging the complexity of Black political identity is significant. So many of us watched the vice presidential debate last night, and we understand that we're in this moment where the urgency of showing up politically, the urgency of voting for a number of different reasons, and also what I have acknowledged for years now, the urgency of Black people being able to function in some level of collective way because of specifically anti-Black state violence and how that shows up in Black life. Now, what does it mean to request for Black people to engage with each other collectively, politically, and what does unity even look like, and what does unity even mean in 2020, and upon what basis are we advocating for unity? Race, gender, political party, ideological leaning, and I want to jump into all of that. But before we jump into all of that, I'm going to introduce you to 4 people. These people are not me, but I know them very well, and you probably know them too. So I have a question for you all. Who's woke? You woke? Me. Oh, I've been woke. Stays woke. Let me rewind. Some of y'all not hearing what I'm talking about. Woke. W-O-K-E. Adjective. Definition. Aware. Knowledgeable about what's happening in your communities and in the world, with the ability and willingness to assess and critique how social, political, and economic systems of oppression operate at macro and micro levels. Now that we're on the same page. So I was walking one day and I met a Black man, and he seemed rather woke. Don't change it yet. He seemed rather woke. An ankh around his neck, a scent of Nag Champa incense smoke. He said to me, Queen Sister Mother of the Earth, Black girl, let me treat you like goddess. Let me come into your world because I'm equipped with the knowledge, and I've got all the facts about the stolen history and all the good that came from Blacks. I'm talking math and science and physical equations that they claim to have created after pillaging our nations. Black men say if we are to win, then first we have to look within. And really, if we're going to fight, then first we have to reunite. And really, if it's going to work, then we gotta drop the bullshit. All this European influence on us. I'm not cool with this gay, queer, homosexual agenda ploy to effeminize the Black male. But no, I never will surrender. No. Black man, Black woman, Black child. It's very simple. See, it's this white woman's feminism always getting in the middle. Can't stand these academics, obnoxious Black feminists, well-read, very angry, and probably in need of a therapist. Maybe some green juice as well, to clean out the system. They eating swine and dairy and other foreign organisms. Going to white man's school to acquire a degree so you can get you some prestige and earn a living salary, but we don't need no recognition from the white man, you see. This man believes entirely in African divinity. I say, okay, Black man, but really, what you trying to say? Said that he's woke and he's willing and wants freedom for Black people today. I say, okay, and I keep walking. And so I keep walking. Well, then I come across Black woman reading book. She says to me, gendered binaries are an illusion and patriarchy is a crook. Says she looks forward to the day when all Black lives will matter, including queer and trans and those deemed unworthy of chatter, no conversation about the plight of those who remain invisible, like Black women and girls and those for whom a gendered category is simply inapplicable. She's fed up. Tired of explaining all the time why her sexuality is not aligned with your feminine divine. She tells me, look, how are Black people to prevail when we are ideologically trapped in this damn hotep hell, reproducing the very systems that once stripped us of humanity? Fake deeps, the epitome of anti-intellectuality. She sighs from exhaustion, then returns to her book, then says her dissertation looks at how Black patriarchy cooks up the intra-racial conflict that impedes liberation. And if we could just deal with complexity, that'd be means for celebration. She takes a sip from her mug, then proceeds to explain, that it's very important that we as Black people in academia speak and write in ways that are accessible to Black people outside of these spaces. We must fully reject any form of academic elitist exclusivity. And further, we must acknowledge that the differentiation of radical alterities is conducive to the conceptual logic of a truly advantageous and inclusive Black liberatory praxis. I say, okay. But really, Black woman, what you trying to say? Said that she's woke and she's willing and wants freedom for Black people today. I say, okay, and I keep walking. And I keep walking. Well, then I come across a man who seeks to implement a plan with a loudspeaker in his hand. He says, it is our duty to fight, like it is our duty to win, like we must protect one another and we must love one another. I say, okay, Black man, what are we protesting today? He says, they always shoot us down, and every time they get away with it. No consequence at all, but we won't take it lying down. Nah, let's keep going, y'all. They said Black lives matter, then they said again, Black lives matter, then the cops came. Black lives matter, you're gonna have to move. Black lives matter, now I'm warning you. Black lives matter, sir, you're under arrest. Black lives matter. Black lives matter. Black lives matter. It's now a few hours later. He was in and out fast. Intimidation tactics. Says he's used to being harassed. You know, I catch a lot of flack for all the work that I do. Black people calling me extreme. I'm out here fighting for you. Academics say we don't have a thought through plan, sitting in that ivory tower with a book in your hand. Don't get me started on these internet activists today. Don't come to not one of the meetings, but got everything to say on Facebook, typing from the comfort of your seat. Black people out here dying, you gonna sit at home and tweet, running your mouth about everything we are not doing right. The ones that are on the ground with our bodies in plain sight. Ain't it a shame? Y'all good for talking, talk all night and day, but y'all scared of revolution. What the last poet say? I say, okay, Black man, but really what you trying to say? Said that he's woke and he's willing and wants freedom for Black people today. I say, okay, and I keep walking. I keep walking. Well, then I come across a Black woman on her phone. She says, she wishes these Black radicals would just leave this shit alone. They're making things worse. I mean, really, how much can we complain? We did at some point have a Black man in the White House. Look how much we have gained. And I mean, yes, racism's real. I get that part. But do you think you're going to change the world if all you do is bark, just bark about every single thing that doesn't go your way? With your bullhorn and your picket sign, what really will you change? And yes, I understand that you demand basic civility. But when are we going to talk about Black accountability? We have to address our part in the matter. And if we don't, then we're setting ourselves up for disaster. Pull your pants up. Respect yourself, and maybe then you'll get respect. We have to do better at keeping each other in check. We kill each other, then focus our attention on police. The approach is counterproductive, and quite frankly, it's obsolete, and we must shift our energy. How negative can we be? If all we ever think about is bad things, then we manifest that. You see, I was reading this book the other day, and it literally said exactly what I always say. You attract what you think about the most, you know? And if we think more positively, then our reality will be so. But when I express how I feel, Black people call me a coon. But I just want what's best for us, and I want it soon. I say, okay, Black woman, but really what you trying to say? Said that she's woke and she's willing and wants freedom for Black people today. I say, okay, and I keep walking. So I took you on a trip with me. We met 4 Black folks with 4 different ways of thinking, and they all call themselves woke. Who's really woke? Character 1, with a juice the color green, and a politic that demeans those he doesn't see as kings and queens. Or character 2, the academic, who stands up for the ones most invisible, but speaks in a language we can't all understand, an excess of syllables. Or character 3, the activist, always on the front line, but criticizes those who resist online. Or character 4, respectability politicking for sure, but still wants us to be all right. How will these 4 people unite? That's what it takes, right? No one cast away, nobody left behind, not even the most problematic kind. See, we cannot reproduce the force that tried to kill us off. Because if we do, I'm telling you, we'll have to pay a real cost. Look, what I'm saying is quite simple. We cannot throw each other away. We are complex and conflicted, often stuck in our ways. But regardless of all that, we're absolutely here to stay. So let's teach one another and be open to receive, because we really need each other. This is a fact, guaranteed. Thank you. Okay. Okay. If we can switch it where I can see that, maybe speaker view. Thank you, thank you. Okay.
That was amazing.
Thank you.
Trying to figure out how to do the clapping reaction. Okay, there we go. And mine is.
Okay, are we okay? Good, I think we're good. So I introduced y'all to 4 very interesting Black people. I know them all personally. Oh, okay, I see the chat. I don't see what y'all saying, but I see y'all saying something in the chat. Okay. Now, why did I write this piece? I wrote this piece because I have, and this was, let me see here. We can bring it a little lower. I wrote this piece because I have access to, perfect. I have access to, good? Okay, to all of the communities that these 4 people occupy. So if you all understand what I mean by this, the first character is what would be considered like an Afrocentric cultural nationalist with deeply patriarchal leanings. and this is like if anybody's familiar with like LA culture, LA space, this is like Leimert Park energy, you understand? And so there is a particular culture that is existing there of like pro-Black Afrocentrism, but also like these silent leanings of like the welcoming of patriarchy and heteronormativity as normal, right? And then, but this person believes that they are doing the right thing to advocate for Black people, all Black people. The second character feels the same way. This character, Tanavu is her name, and the first character is Ra Amun El Hotep. That's another thing, so we'll get into details of that. But Tanavu, the second character, she's an academic. She is a Black feminist. She is a thinker, and she essentially is asserting that there's no way that you can advocate for Black freedom without acknowledging the most vulnerable amidst us, and oftentimes the most forgotten amidst us, right? And she's advocating for this. And so amidst this is a very powerful, necessary, and positive thing that is being done. What Tanavu doesn't understand is that she can sometimes actually talk over people because she has access to a type of information because of her resources within academia, because of her proximity, right, to this information, to the extent that she can sometimes assume that she is right and knows better than her non-academic counterpart simply because she has access to very impressive language. Because there is actually a culture that exists where, as you all know, people that know how to speak impressively can sometimes assume that they are right simply because their vernacular and their presentation is impressive. And it actually has many silently classist leanings, right, in that type of assertion. The third character, Julian. I feel very connected to Julian because there were many years of my life where I was the person that was getting judged as the extremist, that was getting judged as the person who was on the ground, because there's a way in which now in 2020, it has become mainstream and normalized to protest. In 2013, when BLM started, it was not mainstream nor normalized to protest. And we were made fun of, we were ridiculed, we were ostracized by a lot of folks that didn't understand what we mean when we say defund the police, what we mean when we say that our criminal justice system is beyond reform, that it is in a space in need of transformation, right? And folks would say, well, you sound so extreme, you sound so radical. Now I understand Julian because he's very adamant about what he's saying, but he also comes off in a way where he can be very judgmental of the people that engage in social justice activism in ways that is not necessarily grassroots activism. Some people, their activism is their scholarship. Some people, their activism is their artistry, you understand. Some people, their activism is keeping their community members well accounted for and alive. And so these are things that we need to consider when we are expanding what it means for all of us to put all hands on deck in urgent times. And so I really, though I understand Julian, he's deeply judgmental about the people that don't engage in activism the way that he engages in activism. And the last character is a doozy, okay? Her name is Jade, and she is what would be considered the person who is deeply invested in politics of respectability. You know, present yourself respectably and you will get respect. Completely not acknowledging the way in which historically, institutionally, culturally, respectability has never saved Black people. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was what would be considered one of the most respectable of them all. Nonviolence, Christian civil disobedience, if you will, and still shot dead. You understand what I'm saying? With a suit on. And so the thing about Jade is that Jade is a representative of so many folks in our community who are advocating for accountability and to stop blaming the system. Now I understand Jade because I understand the notion that if we do different, then things will be different. And to a certain extent, she's advocating for a type of, change your mentality and your reality will change. And while I understand folks that have this mindset, what we find is that sometimes these people do not acknowledge the institutional, practical, physical realities. And they think that the world just exists in this kind of energetic realm without acknowledging institutionally things that our energy has not necessarily brought about, but have been in place since before we got here, okay? When we're talking about a long history of settler colonialism, and we're talking about a long history of chattel slavery. We're talking about a long history of a carceral system and a criminal justice system that was set up, that is not set up for the health, wellness, or justice in Black communities. And so while Jade does make some interesting points, there are holes in her argument, but there are holes in all of the characters' arguments. And the reason that I present this is because we tend to be able to find the holes in other people's arguments more readily than we are able to find the holes in our own arguments. Now, let me make this quick so that I don't go on for too long because I'm not sure how I'm doing on time. But I do want to say that, what time are we at? It's okay, I'm having 6:40, cool. And so what I do want to say is that why is it necessary for us to acknowledge Black folks' complexity amidst the movement for Black lives in an era of Black Lives Matter? Why is it important for us to acknowledge Black folks' complexity? Because historically, we were not given the luxury of complexity. What do I mean by that? Historically, unity and the kind of homogenization, the uniformity of our community was necessary for survival. If you were to acknowledge your difference, you are setting yourself up for vulnerability because you are creating factions and fractions and sections within the group. That was not something that was doable at a certain point in time in this country for the sake, once again, of survival. But what happens when you come into modern times and Black people are afforded the capacity to be able to actually look at our complexities and our differences and distinguish the distinguishing factors that always were there but maybe weren't able to be articulated articulated because of the culture that we lived in. It becomes a very interesting thing when we actually lean into our complexity. Oftentimes we're told that we're being how you can say, not dismissive, but rather we're being divisive when we acknowledge our differences. And this is not the case. What we're doing is being human. What we're doing is being whole. What we're doing is being complex, being all of the things that we did not necessarily have access to. So what we even saw yesterday, before we move into Q&A, one thing I want to mention, what we saw yesterday in the vice presidential debate with Kamala Harris, right, and Pence. You can go on social media now and see that for a lot of people, Senator Harris is, kind of lauded as a bit of a hero for being a Black woman who's standing in her own space, commanding the attention and the respect and asserting her points, how you can say, with dignity and with great clarity and just with astounding debate skills. A Black woman who is very accomplished and very impressive in many regards. Now, what do I mean by acknowledging our complexity? I can acknowledge everything that I just said about Kamala and to actually very much relate to her because of my own experiences being spoken over by white men in these spaces, and et cetera, and having to hold your own and to not seem angry and to try to do all of these things to accommodate the gaze because you know you're being judged. Before you even say anything, you're being judged. And her having to do the mental, emotional gymnastics to navigate that. And I can hold her complexity in saying that Kamala Harris was a proponent of the very criminal justice system that we are critiquing in her work as DA and Attorney General in years past. So what do I mean by that? In the movement in which I am a part of, we are talking about what it means to take resources and funding that is used on policing and prisons and to take those funds and to put it into mental health institutions, affordable education, affordable housing, all of the things that actually make communities safer. Now, is this Professor Fagbamila's opinion? No, this is what the data shows. These are the things that make communities safer. So I can acknowledge Kamala Harris's complexity in saying that she is a Black woman who is very impressive, who has had to navigate spaces that Black women are vulnerable in, and at the very same time, acknowledge that she also was a proponent of the very criminal justice system that we are critiquing at this moment, and to this day is not fully acknowledging and understanding the kind of complexity and the necessity of truly transforming this criminal justice system and not throwing any band-aid reforms on it, if you understand. And so this is what I mean when we're talking about complexity. It's not either or. Gray area is very tricky for people. I'm gonna repeat that. Gray area is very tricky for people. And until we can actually do the work that the intellectual, emotional, and energetic work of engaging complexity, nuance, and gray area, we won't be able to do the work that we claim we're trying to do in this world and in this country. That is part of our charge. Showing up and being able to do nuance in a way that is careful, intentional, loving, and advocating for greater peace in this society. I've spoken enough. I just run my mouth for a very long time. I can't see what y'all are saying in the chat, but I see you're saying some stuff. Okay, thank you all for chiming in. If you have questions, throw them in there because Mariah and I are about to get into it in terms of Q&A.
Okay, thus far we don't have any questions from folks within the chat, but I will go ahead and ask you that I've jotted down while listening to your speech. First of all, thank you so much. I feel like this event could not be more timely given the political climate that we're in. On social media, I feel like there are so, and especially just thinking about conversations with people that I love and that I care about. But we have very, very different political and activist agendas. I was really resonating with the character number 2, the grad student who is talking about we need to highlight the people on the margins. I'm like, oh my gosh, she is pulling my card because that is me. But I think that you really hit the nail on the head when talking about accessibility and how can this language become hindering to people that we are trying to advocate for in this space. Yes. So you talked a little bit about it towards the end, but like this complexity, these gray areas, how can we navigate? I'm just thinking as a community, as Black folks, just in general, how can we navigate this complexity, these gray areas, knowing that there's a lot of the complexity has violence laced within it? So I'm thinking like particularly about character number 1, like the Hotep character in Black Patriarchy. I'm thinking about that. I'm also thinking about the danger within the grad student and the academy, and how the academy is violent towards Black people and Black students. I'm thinking about protester spaces where I've been on the ground with like Charlotte Uprising and folks who aren't interested in like community care and like putting trans folks to the backs, et cetera, and like thinking about the ways that they navigate the protest space. And then last but not least, character number 4, the respectability lady. How do we navigate folks who are like, pull your pants up, you know, act like a respectable person and you'll be treated with respect. So what are the ways that we can like navigate and address the gray area? And Dana asked, how do we start acknowledging the gray area and kind of being comfortable and moving around in it and being careful with one another as we do that?
Absolutely. It is real work, y'all. It doesn't just happen because we want it to. It really happens because we decide. Now, some tools for that. One of the things, when you come across folks that you, maybe let's even just say intracommunally, let's say even specific within your own community, or maybe if we say within Black communities, when you come across folks that you know are on the opposite end of the ideological spectrum of you, or maybe they are your ideological opponent even, meaning that they completely disagree with you, and maybe they even disregard or disrespect something about your particular being or identity because of their political leaning. What do you do with folks that you know are not within your same school of thought? One thing that I've noted to folks, because labor is a very serious thing, especially in this time when we're being very intentional about our mental health. I have learned to not take it upon myself to try to teach everybody everything. It is important that we teach. It is important that we learn. It is important that we're open. But again, mental and emotional labor is a very real thing. So if I come across somebody that I know is possibly invested in misunderstanding me, or invested in only getting their point across and not really hearing fully, rather than me trying to push forward my discussion, my conversation, what I know to be true, not just my opinion, but what I know to be true, I will ask them, well, how do you know? And you know the difference between somebody that you're going to have a conversation with and somebody who's somewhat of a brick wall, who just is looking to attempt to prove you wrong, or how you can say, in some way, shape, or form, not acknowledge the significance of what you are presenting. These types of folks, rather than you being in discussion with them, I compel you to ask them, well, how do you know? Why do you feel that way? You know, I'm talking about if you come across somebody who is spewing what you know to be untrue, potentially harmful, possibly bigoted, borderline violent, if not violent, well, why do you believe that? Well, you know, because my uncle told me that back in 1997, and I like my uncle, he's a good man, and my uncle has always been a good man. Okay, well, how did your uncle know? Well, you know, he read a book that was written by so-and-so, and you know, and that book was very important. Okay, well, what book is that? Were they primary sources? What's the data? Were they secondary sources? Was the book an opinion piece? Let's let you understand. And so what you're doing is you're putting the charge on that person to explain their own leanings, as opposed to you attempting to convert and or get someone to see where you're coming from. What you're doing is you're putting the charge on them to do their own emotional, intellectual labor, as opposed to that being your own labor to carry on. Take them to charge why they believe what they believe. And secondly, it's very important that we begin to do something that has been not advocated for enough in a lot of the spaces that I've been in, which is to acknowledge people's intentions. Does this matter? Some people say, well, you know, intention doesn't matter as much as impact. This is true. But does it mean that intention doesn't matter? Absolutely not. Now, if you're coming across somebody whose intention is to understand, is to be open, but maybe they're saying things that you know you're not aligned with, you know that could potentially be harmful in terms of if this ideology was manifested institutionally in practice, and you come across someone like that, but you know that their intention is for everybody in the world to have access to what they need for this world to be a happy, healthy, kind place. But you know that there's a possibility that their ideological leanings could be what we could identify as potentially problematic. I would say, understand the difference between somebody, again, who is committed to misunderstanding you because they are somewhat of a brick wall. They are comfortable in their potential privilege or comfortable in their ideological space that they're in because they then don't have the impetus upon them to change because they don't want to do that work. Right? And so that's one person where it's like, okay, you have remained comfortable there, even though you know that it's not open and it could be potentially harmful and hurtful to people. Now, and then there's a difference between somebody who is open to learn, who is willing and possibly just doesn't have access or have had access to the same information that you have had access to. We need to begin to be able to distinguish that so that we can stop so that we can be actually able to decipher the difference between an adversary and somebody that just hasn't had same access to the same information as you. When we can really do that, we can get to work. We can get to work.
Wow, that's real. The difference between an adversary and someone who simply has not had the access, because honestly, there's so much information, general information about the way that our candidates who we are given to reflect on, like this information is not widely known. And I feel like in the space, especially in the academic space, we get really into that and we know the ins and outs. And so I love that point. Is it an adversary or does this person simply not have information? And then also thinking about labor, especially depending on like identity and like the people who I end up explaining the most to. And you know, a black man's favorite thing before he finna gaslight you. Let me ask you this. Let me ask you this. Let me ask you this.
Stop. Stop. It's accurate. It is accurate.
That's it. That's it. Okay. I want to get to all the questions here. We have a few more here coming from the chat. Is how can we discuss, because as you were speaking, I was thinking a lot about my parents, right?
Yes,
and I was
absolutely.
thinking about having these types of conversations with my parents. My father, I don't even want to get into how messy these things can get, but how Lauren wants to know, how can we discuss transgenerational trauma across generations and how these things affect the way that we're having these political discussions?
How can we discuss transgenerational trauma and how these are affecting these political discussions? I come across a lot of my students in the past, and of course my like students that I've engaged, I learn from them, they learn from me. It is an exchange, right? a lot of my students have come to me and told me about the issues that they have with their loved ones or their parents or their grandparents and their political allegiances, and having to navigate being in community, being in family, being and loving someone that they know like actively holds like harmful ideologies, if you will. And so when we talk about transgenerational trauma, this brings up a lot of different things for me. Like, not even just in terms of discussing politics with folks of different generations. Like, a lot of transgenerational trauma is unspoken, unsaid, if we're talking about the type of trauma that has existed within Black communities specifically, when we're talking about the legacy that Black people have had to live through, the very silent way that like, how you can say, just power dynamics in the community, and like Black men having to navigate the concept of masculinity in this country, and what like masculinity's proximity to power, but then the state coming and grabbing power away from Black men, throwing them in under the cage, right? And then the need to have to find power elsewhere, and then Black men being in cages and Black women having to step up and be strong and maintain households on their own, carry the weight of the world, resentment because they didn't have help, and all of these types of things. And so if we're talking about even just kind of like the concept of if we're considering what that did even to what would be considered the nuclear family in the 60s and the 70s in Black communities, and like what that does. That's like when we talk about what that does energetically, emotionally, on an unspoken transgenerational level, that's one thing. But then if we're just talking about intergenerational dialogue between people of different generations with different ideological leanings, and I'll go ahead and be kind of stereotypical about it or general about it, because generally what we find is that a lot of what would be considered possibly younger folks, right, being in conversation with folks of an older generation that are not understanding some of the upcoming generations, new, more open ideological leanings about just essentially really reconstructing how we understand gender, reconstructing how we understand what can be possible for everybody having access to food, clothing, shelter, education. When we're talking about all of these things, to some older generations, all of these things seem so extreme and seem so radical, right? Yeah. And so what happens when you're talking to folks that don't understand? I will just say this. I have these conversations, some of these conversations with my family. I had to write the first character. And I know that the first character really, and I start my piece off with the patriarchal, Afrocentric cultural nationalist, because a lot of the points that Ra makes are very necessary points, but a lot of the points that he makes are very, how you can say, harmful, and they have holes in the argument. They're not necessarily truly founded on any real logic. And I had to write this character because I do understand him, and I do understand my parents. My parents didn't sit down and read Audre Lorde. They didn't work with Kimberly Crenshaw in grad school. My parents did not sit down and read Michel Foucault and understand the panopticon. My parents did not sit down and read, you understand what I'm saying? And so what they did was they migrated from Nigeria, so before I was born, so that I might have the option to be able to come here and study this, so that they might come here and work, so that I might have access to the spaces where I would study this information. So what do I look like looking at my parents with they have very positive intentions? They do not have access to the same information that I have had access to. You understand what I'm saying? So what do I look like looking at my parents and being like, oh, Mom, you are just so unwoke. You just don't understand the complexities of gender. You just don't get it, right? Like, no, they don't get it in the same way that I get it, right? And I have had to distinguish between folks that possibly have not had access to this information and don't understand versus folks that are committed to not understanding so that they can remain in their own privilege. We need to be able to distinguish between the two. Now, what we do when we're open and willing to be in discussion with folks that haven't had access to the same information as us within our community is we create that line of possibility of community. Now, we know that people are never going to be homogenous. We know that people are in the world, we know that people in our communities are never going to have the same political ideologies. It's not going to happen. It never has in the world. It won't be in the future unless they put something in our water. You understand what I'm saying? But yeah. It's not going to happen. But what can happen is our capacity to be able to understand those who are open and those who are adversaries. That we can begin to be more, have greater discernment around that so that we can begin to really chip away at disposability culture. Now, I'm not calling it necessarily cancel culture because there's an interesting way that this term cancel culture has been kind of lauded around where, now it's almost like what could be considered like a right-wing talking point, like, oh, cancel culture, y'all just want to cancel people with your PC behavior, et cetera, you understand? And so that's very cringy. This is not what we're talking about. Now, when I say disposability culture, I mean that we, and many of the people on this chat right now understand the urgency of what we mean when we say an abolitionist mindset. What does an abolitionist mindset mean? Not just as it pertains to our criminal justice system, but beginning to embody in our daily lives the practice of not disposing of people. The criminal justice system throws people under the jail. And in our lives, what we do is we say, you problematic, you gone, you done, right? And so what we have to begin to do is say, where did you get that from? And what is your intention? And once you understand the person, then you can begin to proceed with caution and care. Is this making sense what I'm saying, folks?
Very clear, very, very good stuff. Okay. Very clear. We are coming into the 7:00 hour. Lastly, this is the last question that I'll say to just kind of wrap things up. And I feel like this should kind of be a quick one. But what advice would you have for non-Black folks, non-Indigenous folks who are trying to give Black people the space to navigate these differences? Ashley asks, how can we give people space to express themselves without making them feel like they have a burden to represent an entire race?
I think really being stating that. Okay, so I think the person that asked this question is a non-Black person of color who is in many ways presenting and intending to be an ally to Black communities, to Black people. Sometimes it really is just as simple. If their question really is about really making space for Black folks to be complex human beings and to not expect for the Black person to present themselves in a way that they think Black people should present themselves politically, or to not have the Black person that they are in community with feel the burden of representing all Black people in all moments, because that is a heavy, nonsensical burden that I know the feeling of very, very well. Sometimes you really can just say what your intention is. And it doesn't mean that you have to read off your script, but it's like a brown person being, essentially verbalizing and saying, and I'll use a brown person, for example, essentially saying, I'm here. I know I don't understand what you're going through, but I care. I'm here. I'm present. I will show up, and I will figure out ways to show up. And it's not your responsibility to tell me how to show up. I will go learn how to show up. right? And also, like, again, noting, like, you don't always have to bear it. I'm here in whatever capacity you might need me. It is not like there's not a script, it's openness. It's as simple as, I'm here. I know I don't understand what you're going through, but I care. I will make myself available to help in the ways that I can. Like, when we start to really deal with each other as human beings and stop trying to be, you know, a super ally, you know, just be a human being, you know?
Right. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. The performance was absolutely stellar and amazing. I feel like this is very much needed during this time, and a lot of people need to see this work, and I'll definitely be talking to you about it, hopefully after this event, as well as letting people know, because this has really touched me, because this is literally all that's been on my mind, is thinking about how do we navigate these differences of opinion in such a highly political and highly sensitized moment, unprecedented times, right? Well, the
Right, and say
MCC.
one thing before
Yeah,
you wrap up. Forgive me, I know we have to wrap up.
I
You
just want to
all that
respect that.
are you all that are on the chat still, I hope that we still have some folks here with us. I'm going to be doing the full stage play on Sunday. That's what, 3 days from now, on Sunday at 5 p.m. Okay, Sunday 5 p.m. The link to be able to just go, you know, watch it at 5 p.m. on Sunday, or it'll take you to a quick registration and then it'll send you the Zoom link. It's going to be affiliated with another university that's doing the full production. Come join us. It really is going to be a night of theater. Get your popcorn. Now, those 4 characters that you saw today, we're going to be going in depth. Okay, so the performance that you saw today was 20 minutes. This will be a 75-minute long performance where you really will get to know each of the characters and why they are the way that they are. Are we still on? Okay, so join us on Sunday if you so desire at 5 p.m. You can go onto my Instagram, and the link will be at the link in my bio. My Instagram is FUNMI_Lola. So that's Fumi_Lola. You'll see an ad for the production on my page, Fumi_Lola on Instagram. The link will be there. I have not been posting a lot lately. I've been very busy, but the link will be there for you so that you can join us on Sunday.
All right, Funmilola, thank you so much for your time and for your performance and for all of your thoughts. We just want to thank you for coming to the MCC at UCSB virtually and sharing space with us and talking with us. I do want to encourage everyone to continue to go and check out the events on the MCC webpage, and also tap into Funmilola's Instagram and click the link in her bio to kind of get into that performance this Sunday. I know that I'm going to do it because I want to see the whole thing. If this is just 4 characters, I want to know the rest. So thank you so much, Funmilola. It was amazing talking to you and listening to your performance. Everybody will
Thank you,
unmute.
Mariah. Thank you.
I don't know.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
So,
you.
well, I can't just leave her, you know, if she thinks we're in the middle of pen, she'll start, you know, howling.
Okay, at least